First Unitarian Denver. So a few months ago, our Faith in Action Council asked me to do a Sunday service around climate change and climate justice in honor of Earth Day this year. And I realized I had never personally done this before. Now, we've had other people speak on this issue, and I've mentioned it in many other sermons, and I've helped organize services around environmental justice or climate justice, but I had never dedicated an entire sermon to the subject on my own, and that seemed strange to me. So I was reflecting on why that would be true, and I realized that I had never figured out how to frame or talk about climate change in a way that would be both truthful and hopeful, as ministers are supposed to be. I also didn't see how I could present any new information or things we don't all already know. And if I'm brutally honest, I'm a little embarrassed about how little I have personally done and how I myself have failed to take climate change and climate justice seriously in my own activism. The information is on climate change and climate justice is widely available, it's widely known. And the truth, to be truthful, is not hopeful. We're in trouble. We're in big trouble. Almost unimaginable. 2 years ago tomorrow, some of the most quoted words about climate change were spoken to the European Parliament. They went like this. My name is Greta Thunberg. I am 16 years old. I come from Sweden, and I want you to panic. I want you to act as if your house was on fire. I have said these words before, and a lot of people has explained why that is a bad idea. A great number of politicians have told me that panic never leads to anything good, and I agree. To panic, unless you have to, is a terrible idea. But when your house is on fire and you want to keep your house from burning to the ground, then that does require some level of panic. Unquote. So I'm not going to cite a bunch of science to you this morning. I'm not going to talk about levels of CO2 or deforestation or the average temperature rise across the planet over the past 50 years or the projections for the next 50 years. I'm not going to talk about climate feedback loops and mass extinctions and rising seas or the millions of climate refugees that will result and the political destabilization that will inevitably follow. The short answer is that it's bad, and it's almost certainly worse than you think. As has been studied extensively now, facts don't change people. We and every single global industry and the elected leaders everywhere are well aware of the facts, and hardly anyone, myself included, are behaving as if our houses were on fire. So I learned a new word last week. Collapsology is the study of how systems destabilize and fall apart. In the case of climate change, collapsology refers to all the interlocking systems that support modern human life. Political systems, social systems, security and military systems, economic systems, including all the goods and services that feed and water and clothe and transport and entertain and protect and shelter our bodies, every single one of which is dependent on the larger environmental system of sunlight, temperature, water, the composition of the atmosphere, the soil, the chemistry of the earth itself. Collapsology is the formal study of how and when the ecological system becomes upset or destabilized, and shows that all of those other systems will also be upset and destabilized. There will be no escape, no one, no place, and no thing can or will be unaffected. Stéphanie Orjolet, I think I said that right, is a French science journalist, and she writes that COVID-19 has given us a wonderful example of how collapsology works. There's now mountains of data showing how a single disruption, in this case a virus, only moderately contagious and moderately deadly, has ripped and rippled through every single system on Earth. And she says, if this doesn't get our attention about just how fragile our systems are and get us to take a hard look at those systems, we are probably not nearly as smart as we think we are. So we know that scientific facts and projections and evidence don't change large-scale human behavior. And we know that talk of environmental doom and gloom doesn't change large-scale human behavior. And there are wonderful studies around the personal and social psychology of all that. I was moved by something Bill McKibben, the American environmental activist and journalist, wrote about a number of years ago. Wanting to better understand the culture of denial around climate change, he decided to study the message and method of mass media in general, over 100 cable TV channels, and he wrote a book about it he called The Age of Missing Information. And the book has all kinds of insights about history and about community and how we've developed into some of the things we've developed into, but in McKibben's own words, distilled down to its essence, the message that comes through television and through most every other instrument of consumer society, the underlying assumption behind all of it is this: you are the most important thing on earth. You are the center of the universe, and everything revolves around you. There's no we. There's no community. There's no common good. And even the moral and ethical code, right, that holds up kindness and mutual responsibility in this media environment inevitably comes with a kind of an unspoken wink and a nod, that those are nice, but they're novelties, and they don't have to be taken seriously. In another setting, referring to that book in its conclusion, Bill McKibben said, if you wanted to create a message that was profoundly troubling from a spiritual point of view, and one that made progress on issues of great importance, especially issues of the environment, particularly difficult, you couldn't pick a better one than you are the center of the universe and everything revolves around you. Bill McKibben is also the first person I heard openly and emphatically refer to climate change as a crime, and a crime against humanity, not just in general, but very specifically in the case of the island and coastal indigenous people of the world. Climate change is literally genocide. So a brief note about terms as we go forward here. Climate change refers to all the physical, measurable aspects of temperature and chemistry that sustain life as we know it. Climate justice refers specifically to the myriad ways in which it is the world's poor and indigenous and already disenfranchised people who contribute the least to climate change, but who are and will suffer the most from the effects of climate change. That's climate justice. So, turns out there's a whole body of work out there about climate change denial. And beyond the ridiculous outright denial of scientific fact as typified by the previous administration. And one of those that caught my attention was sociologist Stanley Cohen, who identifies two forms of denial that he calls interpretive and implicative. Interpretive denial is when we accept certain facts, but we interpret them in a way that makes them safer to our personal psychology. We understand that our consumption of oil and gas is raising global temperatures, and raising temperatures means disruptive weather patterns, and rising ocean temperatures and raises the sea level and the decimation of island and coastal people, on and on. But we tell ourselves that's far away, and we don't know those people, and there's nothing we can do about it anyway, or some other justification for essentially doing nothing. That's interpretive denial. We interpret information basically to suit our own interests or ourselves. Implicative denial is when we accept and acknowledge the facts and their implications, and we respond by busying ourselves with largely symbolic performative activities related to the issue, but effectively meaningless, like signing online petitions or renouncing flying or posting something on Facebook or any number of other motions that let us think we're doing something while still not emotionally, culturally, or politically confronting the reality of climate change. I am personally guilty of both types of those denials. So it's really hard to know what to do or what to think when it comes to climate change and climate justice. To quote my colleague, Reverend Karen Johnston, instead of stopping global warming, there are some who have given up the notion of prevention and now speak of mitigation. Sometimes folks with this worldview, and perhaps it is you, speak of adaptation, lowercase a kind of adjustment that forecasts society as still recognizable, our current linear economy more or less intact, just smaller, inconvenient to be sure, but manageable. Then there are those who speak of reversing the damage, of seeking salvation or perhaps even redemption through technology or artificial intelligence or a combination of both, seeding the clouds, carbon capture. And perhaps this is you. Even though I do not hold these worldviews, if you do, I honor you. I'm still quoting Reverend Johnston here. There are those who believe we are well beyond the tipping point, and yet believe that it's irresponsible to disseminate that perspective, no matter the science to back it up, for that raises despair. Perhaps that is you. Unquote. So here's where I find myself coming from, at least at this moment in time, at least right now. Jem Bendell, founder of the Institute for Leadership and Sustainability and founder of the Deep Adaptation Forum, which I have recently joined, is a big picture kind of scholar and a pretty fierce critic of the professional environmental movement. I won't try and do justice to all his thinking on a single Sunday morning, but I find his approach persuasive and perhaps even a little perversely hopeful. Bendell believes we are well beyond the tipping point, that the landslide has started, it will only pick up steam, and global warming will inevitably lead to social, political, and economic collapse across the planet. Collapsology. Unprecedented human suffering. And he thinks it's essential that we face this directly, outwardly, and loudly. He thinks all the arguments for holding back on the doom and gloom predictions are shallow and frankly stupid, and that frank acknowledgement and emotional acceptance may be the only thing capable of being an effective counter-narrative to the cultural zeitgeist that the world revolves around you, and might get a majority of us beginning to think in terms of we, might actually get us working together towards some common goals. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying you, whoever you are out there, or that everyone needs to adopt this point of view. I'm just sharing that right now, given what I know today, I personally find this point of view persuasive. Bendell advocates for what he calls deep adaptation, capital A. And he lays out 4 principles as a framework that everyone can begin talking about, developing, and doing right now. The 4 principles are resilience, relinquishment, restoration, and reconciliation. I'll do those one by one. Resilience, for Bendel, is a deeper concept than the typical notion of just bouncing back from adversity. It's about intentional discernment and intentional cultivation of capacities that will serve us going forward into this brave new world. Capacities like love and generosity, sharing resources, building community, developing alternative economies, and, of course, the basic survival skills of being able to make things and fix things and growing food and purifying water and so on. Cultivating these capacities, not just as individuals, but as communities. Resilience. Second is relinquishment, letting go, the opposite of cultivating. Letting go of the capacities and the attitudes and the behaviors that may have served us in the past, but will no longer do so. In fact, are probably making things worse. On a concrete level, building buildings along coastlines and on floodplains and on hillsides made of mud. Building houses with thousands of square feet that have to be heated and cooled and so on. Making products by child and slave labor. Trips and vehicles, even pumpkin spice lattes that are unnecessary. Access to foods from halfway across the planet or those that are out of season locally. We should probably get used to the idea of not having bananas here in Colorado and peaches only in July through September. On a deeper level, though, relinquishing the cultural assumption that you are the center of the universe. Third is what he calls restoration, rediscovering attitudes and approaches to our lives that have been largely or wholly left by the wayside in our fossil fuel saturated growth-based society. Waking with the sun, sleeping with the setting, moving away from a linear economy of take and use, win or lose, to a more circular economy that values reducing, reusing, and recycling everything it is possible to reduce, reuse, or recycle, not valuing things or products or services that are designed to be disposable, single-use, or planned obsolescence. And fourth, maybe the most spiritual of all the 4 principles, reconciliation, asks us, what could I make peace with to lessen suffering? What can I make peace with that will lessen suffering? Reconciliation is an invitation to make peace within ourselves and with others, in our personal lives and in our cultural circumstances. To practice reconciliation is to take healing seriously, healing ourselves and our own wounds, healing our relationships, healing systemic racism, healing the violence of poverty, calling on whatever divine source in our lives calls to us. Reconciliation as a guiding principle is essential because without it, we risk tearing each other apart when things get tough. So the difficulty of Bendel's vision is accepting, facing, internalizing very painful truths about where humanity and the planet appear to be headed. The beauty of Bendel's vision is that these 4 principles are available right now. No waiting required, and they are life-giving no matter what happens. In other words, if Bendel is right, adopting the principles of resilience, relinquishment, restoration, and reconciliation will help to mitigate the suffering. And if he's wrong, those same principles will just make us better people, more connected, more aware, more whole, less destructive. Now, he's not saying we should abandon all the work being done on sustainable energy or sustainable agriculture or Green New Deals, carbon collection, and so on. He's saying that personally and collectively, we are not helpless, we are not powerless, and we are not bystanders. This is our lives. This is our house. This is our children's lives and their children's lives, and we can engage this out of love. So it's been a few years since First Unitarian Denver has had a climate change, climate justice group, and that is changing, like right now, as I speak. And you are all invited to the Earth Day inaugural meeting of our new climate justice group that will meet over Zoom this coming Wednesday at 6 p.m. Details are in first announce and I believe are going to show up in the chat box right about now. I'm going to close this sermon on adaptation, climate change, and climate justice by quoting another of my colleagues, Reverend Molly Hausch Gordon. And she wrote, "Here is my not at all joking, totally serious list of how to survive the end of the world. Get to know your neighbors. Feed them. Let them feed you. Watch each other's kids, grandkids, pets. Develop the muscle of generosity like you're training for a giving ultramarathon. Share everything you can with anyone who asks, and ask for what you need. Get in touch with your body. You will need it, and it knows things. Pay attention to what's happening below your neck. Tell the truth. Tell it to yourself first. Sit at the feet of your most vulnerable neighbors in your own most vulnerable places. They have the most to teach you about survival. Listen. Remember your ancestors and the things they survived. Find the resilience that is your birthright and the courage that made way for your life. Practice taking risks. Show up in every struggle where someone is fighting for their dignity, because that is how we will all survive. Learn about reparations and native sovereignty. Double down on exorcising supremacy systems from your soul. Learn to be tender. Refuse to be hardened. Let your heart be moved every damn time. Root in the place you are. Learn its history, learn its geography, learn its seasons, sing a lot, dance, make art, make love, rest luxuriously when you can, eat pie. The world is ending and beginning now. We are surviving now. Let us love. Let us connect. Let us fight like hell for the dignity of each and all. Amen.